Chapter 6, At the Red Cliffs. It probably seems like I've been repeating the phrase, deepening our knowledge of the world mythology ad nauseum. But that is, for better or for worse, a characteristic of opening books in epic sagas. Even 3/4 of the way through, we are still exploring the world, which I actually enjoy as both a writer and a reader. When the world of a series gets stagnant, it loses that immersive quality. You can never know everything about our real world, so how can you expect to run out of things to learn in this fictional one? That continues with the introduction of the Halls of Heritage in this chapter, how it's used as a mausoleum with preserved bodies, which ties into the reoccurring theme of resurrection. The scene also serves as a date of sorts between Cowdy and Arsenio, because I'm not typically a romance writer, so I struggle to focus on just the romance aspects when I feel like the greater plot should always be moving forward. We do get our first kiss between the leads, however, a tender and heartbreaking moment. While Farron and Nokara are homophobic, I did not want to tell a story where the main characters fight who they are. I feel like that's been done a lot and to excellent degree, but it was not a story that I was interested in telling again, especially when I wanted the romance between Cowdy and Arsenio to be the central thing and not them coming to realize they loved each other, right? They know that they love each other essentially from the moment that they meet. So despite facing an adversarial social landscape, I really wanted a story where the two characters who fall in love accept their attractions. Now, Mari's portion of this chapter is divided into two very different emotions. First, I wanted to ground the reader in a scene where you're just living in the world for a bit. Another common development in long-running series is that we lose the charm of the first book because things get action-heavy as the plot develops, which is totally necessary, of course, but we lose the smaller innocence of the beginning. So I could have easily cut Mari's game aboard the rescue ship, but it felt too much like losing a rounding experience for a character who is mostly serious in all of her scenes. It also serves to balance out the devastation of the scene that follows, where Galena takes Mariana and her companions around the ruined city of Redcliffe. There's so much death and destruction that, again, we need those moments of levity for characters to feel three-dimensional. Chapter 7, As the Sun Follows the Moon. And now, Emilio's big reveal, the gray life within the gray life. With the way I write stories, it's fairly difficult to determine which scene was the first to come along. I keep a notebook full of scene ideas that I want to use, but which don't necessarily belong to anything yet. This was one of those scenes that I kept floating around in my notebook for years. And as I developed the idea for Grey Lives for the Tides That Rain, it fell perfectly into place, which is always a great feeling. Some scenes exist in some form or another in that notebook for upwards of a decade, which can lead me to wonder whether they'll ever get used. But I rarely like to build a story around a scene instead of fitting scenes into stories, although it does happen on occasion when the idea is really impactful to me and begs to be told. Now, Emilio's big reveal. The balancing act with reveals is always, when do you as the writer want the reader to realize what's going on? It can happen before, at the same time, or after the character of interest, depending on the vibe that you're going for. I tend to favor reader realizes a split second before the character, because it assumes that the reader is smart enough to connect the dots and rewards them when they do. I don't like the reader to figure things out too far ahead, though, because then there's a drag as you're waiting for the character to catch up. Now, the opposite is to leave the reader to connect the dots after the character, but I find that can often lead the reader to either actually figuring things out before intended and therefore feeling unsatisfied, or feeling like the narrator is intentionally withholding information just to maximize drama. Here I give the reader Jacinta's name followed by the appearance of Helena so they can piece things together before Emilio has the chance to figure it out, since he doesn't know who those people are and their importance. The reader's actual timeline of understanding might vary, but the reveal is usually still fun regardless. This is followed by Cowdy and Arsenio's night of passion and the decision to leave. Music is a really big part of how I experience writing my novels. The music I listen to in general just changes depending on what I'm working on at the time. And a lot of times I will compose certain motifs to help me better understand my characters. It's difficult to convey music in writing, though, because they are inherently different mediums. I can describe the feeling of a song, but unless I give the reader the actual notes, they don't truly know what I'm talking about. That said, the introduction of the Snowdrift melody is such a crucial point for these two star-crossed lovers, because they will be apart for so much of the series that it was necessary to ground their relationship in this recurrent melody. I have a real song composed for this, but we'll see if it ever gets recorded and released. Chapter 8, Devastation. For the beginning of the last chapter, again, this became one of those instances of who would give the scene the most interesting perspective. Kaori and Arsenio are saying their goodbyes, which could be another straightforward heartbreaking scene, but I felt like we'd already read their more interesting goodbye at the end of the previous chapter. Since this is a moment of character growth and understanding for Taigen, I set it in his point of view so that we get an understanding of his thought process as he considers for the first time that this thing he's been taught about, relationships outside the norm, might not be valid. We also get our first glimpse at how Taigen is skirting some of the rules of the palace. He has developed a tenuous friendship with his sister Yori when he isn't supposed to know that they're related at all. It's one of the first times that we see that the Nokari way of governance clearly has its flaws. For Mari's final segment, we get the attack on the ship with Shadowfire, what Fogosombre has been working on throughout the book, and which we've so far only seen the aftermath of. In a mirror of the opening sequence, Mari is again tormented by fire and barely escapes with her life. Design of Darkness contains a lot of moving pieces, but there are relatively few true action sequences. The reader is used to a certain cadence, which should effectively heighten the thrill of this pivotal scene, and set the stage for a much faster pace in Book 2. It's a declaration of war against Kailan effectively, leading Misel to call for aid from Nokara. Now back to Kaori. Arsenio helps Kaori grow in a lot of ways, but I thought it was important for him to have his moment of major growth unprompted by Arsenio. Hearing of the devastation in Paue, Kaori cannot stand by while innocent people are killed, and at last he stands up to his advisors and decides to send ships to Kailan. Well, everything has been set up, and we are ready for the Tides That Rain to take off. That'll do it for Design of Darkness. Thank you to everyone for listening and for supporting my Kickstarter relaunch of this series. I hope my little behind-the-scenes glimpse gave you a greater appreciation for Design of Darkness. I'll see you next time for Sparrow Sing of Dying, Book 2, and the Tides That Rain.